Most people think disappearing is dramatic. The real tragedy is staying where your presence no longer matters. But there is a specific category of person for whom this observation cuts differently. The person who is, by any measurable standard, more capable than most of the people around them, and who has, despite that capability, arrived at a point in their life where the material, relational, and psychological results are indistinguishable from failure. They're still brilliant. The intelligence has not degraded. The perception is still sharp. The analysis still precise. The capacity for understanding still operating at a level that most people in their proximity cannot match. And yet the life does not reflect any of it. The relationships are unstable or absent. The vocation is misaligned or unfulfilling. The accumulated evidence of what a person with their capabilities should have built by now is conspicuously, sometimes devastatingly, absent. This is not an uncommon situation. It is, in fact, one of the most consistent patterns observable in people of genuine intellectual and creative capacity. Jung encountered it repeatedly in his clinical work. The brilliant patient whose intelligence had become the primary mechanism of their own defeat. And what he found when he examined it closely is what this script is about. The answer is not comfortable. It never is when the problem being named is one you have spent years using your intelligence to avoid seeing. Chapter 1. The specific ways intelligence becomes a liability. Intelligence, in a conventional cultural narrative, is an unambiguous advantage. It is the trait that generates solutions, that navigates complexity, that produces the outcomes that less capable people cannot access. This narrative is accurate in a narrow range of contexts and profoundly misleading as a general description of how high intelligence actually functions in a complete human life. The contexts in which intelligence is straightforwardly advantageous are the contexts in which the problem is external, well-defined, and responsive to analysis. Technical problems, strategic problems, problems that yield to the application of sufficient cognitive capacity directed at a sufficient quantity of relevant information. Most of the problems that determine the quality of human life are not these kinds of problems. They are internal problems, problems of motivation, of self-regulation, of the management of emotion and relationship, and the accumulated weight of psychological history. And in these domains, high intelligence does not function as an advantage. It functions with unsettling frequency as a sophisticated obstruction. The intelligence that would, in a technical domain, generate solutions generates instead, in the psychological domain, rationalizations. Justifications for inaction that are too coherent to be easily dismissed. Analyses of situations that are accurate in every particular except the one that requires the person to do something difficult about their own behavior. Explanations for outcomes that locate causation everywhere except in the psychological patterns that the intelligence has been protecting from examination for years. Chapter 2. Jung's concept of psychological compensation and why it traps the brilliant. Jung observed across decades of clinical practice a consistent pattern he called psychological compensation, the tendency of the psyche to develop one function at the expense of its opposite, and for the overdeveloped function to compensate for, to mask, to substitute for, to draw attention away from the underdeveloped one. In the case of the highly intelligent person, the overdeveloped function is thinking, not just the capacity for analysis, but the entire orientation toward experience that treats thinking as the primary mode of engagement with reality, as the tool through which all experience is processed, all decisions are made, all relationships are navigated, all internal states are managed. The underdeveloped function in compensation is typically feeling, not emotion in the superficial sense, but the Jungian function of feeling, which is the capacity to evaluate experience in terms of its meaning and value, to make contact with what actually matters rather than what is merely analyzable. The compensation means that the brilliant person's intelligence is not just a cognitive capacity. It is a defensive structure, one that substitutes the precision of analysis for the uncomfortable vulnerability of genuine feeling, that converts every situation that requires emotional engagement into a problem that requires intellectual solution, and that does this so automatically and so effectively that the person is frequently unaware that a substitution is occurring. The result is a person who can explain everything and inhabit almost nothing, who can analyze their relationships with surgical precision and maintain almost none of them, who can articulate the psychological dynamics behind their own patterns with textbook accuracy and change almost none of them. The intelligence is real. real. The contact with life that the intelligence is substituting for is almost entirely absent. Hashtag Chapter 3, the rationalization engine and how it defeats its host. The most destructive application of high intelligence in a psychological context is the rationalization of inaction. This is not a morally freighted observation. It is a mechanistic one. The rationalization engine, the specific use of cognitive capacity to generate plausible explanations for why the difficult thing should not be done, why the necessary confrontation should be postponed, why the pattern that is producing the outcomes should be understood rather than changed, is not a character flaw. It is what happens when a most powerful tool in the psyche's possession is applied to the one task it should never be given: the justification of the status quo. A less intelligent person, confronted with a pattern that is producing obviously bad outcomes, cannot construct a sufficiently convincing rationalization to sustain the pattern past the point where the evidence against it has become overwhelming. The intelligence is not adequate to the task of the justification. The pattern therefore collapses under the weight of its own results. The highly intelligent person, confronted with the same evidence, can generate a rationalization that is sophisticated enough to remain viable past that point, to account for the counter-evidence, to contextualize the failures, to locate the causation in factors external to the pattern being protected. The rationalization is not necessarily wrong in all its particulars. It may contain accurate observations about external factors that genuinely contributed to the outcome. Its function is not accuracy. Its function is the preservation of the one thing it is not allowed to examine: the pattern itself. This is how brilliance defeats itself, not through a single catastrophic failure of judgment, but through the sustained, sophisticated, and genuinely impressive application of cognitive capacity to the protection of the psychological structure that is producing the damage. Hashtag Chapter 4, the Unlived Life and Where It Goes. Jung introduced the concept of the unlived life to describe the accumulation of unlived experience in people whose psychological development has been arrested, whose growth stopped at some point because the cost of continuing it exceeded what the self, as currently constituted, could pay. For the brilliant person, the unlived life has a specific character. It is not unlived because the person lacked the capacity to engage with it. It is unlived because the intelligence that could have enabled the engagement was redirected consistently and with increasing sophistication into the analysis of the engagement rather than the engagement itself. The relationship was analyzed rather than inhabited. The creative work was conceived rather than executed. The confrontation that was needed was rehearsed in the mind with every possible variable accounted for, and then postponed because the analysis revealed a complexity that made the action seem premature. The unlived life does not disappear. Jung was explicit about this. The unlived life accumulates in the unconscious as shadow material, as a growing repository of unrealized potential that exerts increasing pressure on the conscious personality as it accumulates. In the highly intelligent person, this pressure expresses itself in a specific and recognizable form. The persistent, vague, often inarticulate sense that something is missing, that the life is currently constituted is not the life that was actually available, that somewhere in the distance between what was thought and what was done lies the real life that the analysis was perpetually preparing for and never quite reached. This sense is accurate. The analysis was preparing for something that the analysis itself was making impossible. Hashtag Chapter 5, why brilliant people self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is among the most frequently discussed and least adequately explained phenomena in popular psychology. The standard explanations, fear of success, low self-worth, unconscious identification with failure, are not wrong, but they are incomplete in a way that misses the specific mechanism operating in highly intelligent people. For the brilliant person, self-sabotage frequently operates not through avoidance of success, but through the conversion of potential success into an intellectual exercise that can be indefinitely refined and never completed. The business that was analyzed for years and never launched. The relationship that was evaluated past the point where evaluation serves and into the territory where it substitutes for the commitment the evaluation was supposed to inform. The creative project that exists in a more complete and more perfect form in a mind than it will ever exist in the world, because the mind can sustain a version that reality cannot. And submitting the work to reality means accepting a comparison that the internal version is guaranteed to lose. This is not fear of failure in the ordinary sense. It is the specific terror of the highly intelligent person, the terror of discovering that the intelligence, which has been the primary source of identity and the primary mechanism of navigation, is insufficient to produce the outcomes that the identity promises. The intelligence can conceive anything. It cannot guarantee the execution of anything. An execution, messy, imperfect, exposed to comparison and criticism and the irreversible commitment of real resources to real outcomes, is the one domain in which the intelligence provides no protection. Self-sabotage keeps the person in the domain where the intelligence is sovereign, the domain of potential. Chapter 6. The relational consequences of living primarily in the mind. The person who has oriented the majority of their psychological life toward thinking, toward analysis, toward the evaluation and re-evaluation of experience rather than the inhabitation of it, produces a specific relational signature that is consistent across contexts and almost uniformly damaging to the quality of connection available to them. The first element of this signature is the quality of their listening, which is not actually listening in the full sense, but a parallel processing operation. While the other person speaks, the brilliant person is analyzing what is being said, constructing responses, identifying inconsistencies, mapping the subtext, and generally treating the other person's communication as data to be processed rather than experience to be shared. This is detectable. The person being listened to in this way frequently cannot name what is wrong, but they can feel the absence of genuine reception, the specific quality of not quite, landing of speaking into a processing operation rather than into actual contact. The second element is the tendency to resolve through analysis situations that required presence rather than solutions. Someone in pain does not need their pain analyzed. They need it witnessed. The brilliant person encountering another person's pain converts it immediately into a problem requiring a solution, because that is what the dominant function does with every input, and delivers the solution with a precision that is accurate and entirely beside the point. The third element is the use of intellectual complexity as a substitution for emotional vulnerability. Rather than acknowledging what is actually felt in a situation, the brilliant person generates an analysis of the situation that is sophisticated enough to account for what is being felt without requiring them to be accountable to it. This is experienced by the people in relationship with them as a specific kind of distance, not hostility, but an absence of genuine arrival. Chapter 7. Jung on who deserves what they get. Jung's clinical observations produced a formulation that is direct enough to be uncomfortable for most people to sit with, that the outcomes of life are not random, not primarily the product of circumstance, and not adequately explained by the distribution of talent and opportunity. They are the product of the relationship between a person's capacities and their willingness to undergo the psychological work that the development of those capacities requires. A person of high capacity who refuses the psychological work does not get the outcomes that their capacity promises. They get the outcomes that the unworked psychology produces, regardless of how high the capacity is. And the unworked psychology of a highly intelligent person produces outcomes that are, in some ways, worse than those of a less intelligent person who has done the work, because the intelligence makes the avoidance more sustainable and the rationalizations more convincing for longer. Deserving, in Jung's framework, is not a moral category. It is a developmental one. A person deserves the outcomes of the level of psychological development they have actually reached, not the level they are potential pointed toward, not the level their intelligence suggested was available, not the level that would be reached if the work they have been postponing were finally done. What you get is not a function of what you are capable of becoming. It is a function of what you have actually become. And becoming, in the Jungian sense, requires the willingness to encounter exactly the material that the rationalization engine has been protecting you from encountering. The brilliant person who ends up with nothing has not been cheated by circumstance. They have been outwitted by their own most powerful tool. Chapter 8. The specific failure of emotional development. high intelligence, as a developmental advantage, tend to accelerate cognitive development significantly faster than emotional development. And the gap between the two is one of the most consistent sources of the outcomes this script is describing. The brilliant child learns to navigate the world primarily through cognitive superiority, through being right, through solving problems faster than the people around them, through the specific social currency of intellectual performance that many environments reward in ways that create a feedback loop. The feedback loop teaches, at a formative level, that cognitive performance is the primary mechanism of value and of safety, that being right, being smart, being analytically superior is what secures position, generates approval, and navigates difficulty. The emotional development that should accompany this cognitive development frequently does not, because the environments that reward intellectual performance rarely require emotional development as a condition of the same rewards. The result is an adult who has the cognitive equipment of someone significantly older than their chronological age and the emotional equipment of someone significantly younger. This asymmetry is not visible in the domains where cognitive performance is the primary requirement. It becomes devastatingly visible in the domains where it is not. Sustained intimate relationships, the navigation of professional environments where emotional intelligence is a prerequisite for advancement past a certain level, the management of their own motivational and regulatory systems in the absence of the external structure that cognitive performance provided in educational contexts. The intelligence cannot compensate for the emotional development that was never undertaken. It can only generate increasingly sophisticated explanations for why the outcomes produced by the asymmetry were not its fault. Hashtag Chapter 9, the shadow of the brilliant person. Every person has a shadow. The shadow of the highly intelligent person has a specific configuration that is worth examining in its particulars, because it differs from the shadow of an ordinary person in ways that make it simultaneously more powerful and more dangerous. The ordinary shadow contains the disowned traits, impulses, and capacities that the conscious personality rejected as incompatible with its self-concept. The shadow of the brilliant person contains all of this, plus an additional layer. It contains everything that the intelligence decided was beneath it. The simple, the direct, the ordinary human experience of simply being present in a situation without analyzing it. The emotional responses that are not sophisticated enough to be interesting. The desires that are too straightforward to require the intelligence's involvement. The genuine vulnerability of acknowledging that the intelligence is not sufficient and that something else, something the intelligence cannot produce or substitute for, is needed. These are what the brilliant person's shadow contains, and they are what the brilliant person most needs. Not more analysis, not a more refined rationalization, not a more complete understanding of the psychological dynamics that produce the outcomes. The capacity to be simple, to be direct, to want something without immediately converting the wanting into a problem to be solved, to be present in a relationship without the parallel processing running continuously underneath, to act without the analysis being complete, because the analysis is never complete, because completion is not the point, because the intelligence converted completion into a condition of action specifically to prevent the action from occurring. The shadow of the brilliant person is full of everything the intelligence decided it did not need. It is wrong about almost all of it. Hashtag Chapter 10, what the work actually requires. The work that the brilliant person most needs to do is the work that the intelligence is least equipped to perform and most determined to prevent. It is not cognitive work. It is not the acquisition of more psychological frameworks, more self-understanding, more accurate maps of the dynamics that produce the outcomes. The brilliant person already has more than enough of all of these. The work is the work of the body, of the emotions, of the simple and unglamorous practice of being present in experience rather than processing it from a sufficient analytical distance that the experience never quite lands. It is the work of tolerating the specific discomfort of acting before the analysis is complete, of making a commitment in a relationship, in a vocation, in a creative work, before the intelligence has identified and addressed every possible objection to the commitment. It is the work of staying in difficult emotional situations past the point where the analysis of those situations has been completed, because the analysis is not the same as the experience, and the experience is what the work requires. It is, in its most fundamental form, the work of being a person rather than an observer of personhood, of accepting the vulnerability, the imprecision, the genuine exposure to outcomes that cannot be controlled that actual living, as distinct from the analysis of living, always entails. Jung called this the transcendent function, the capacity to hold the tension between the thinking function and the feeling function, between the analysis and the experience, without resolving it prematurely in either direction. The brilliant person resolves it, always and automatically, in the direction of thinking. The work is the practice of not resolving it, of tolerating the tension long enough for something other than an analysis to emerge. Hashtag closing, the cold accounting of wasted capacity. Here is the inventory taken without sentiment. The brilliant person who ends up with nothing did not fail because the intelligence was insufficient. The intelligence was more than sufficient. It was the problem. Not because intelligence is a problem in itself. It is not. But because intelligence in the specific configuration that this script has been describing, deployed primarily in the service of its own protection rather than in the service of actual development, is the most effective available mechanism for the production of a life that contains the appearance of capability and the absence of its results. You can analyze this. You can understand it with complete precision. You can identify exactly where the rationalization engine engaged, exactly what it was protecting, exactly which confrontations it converted into thought experiments that required more preparation before they could be executed. The understanding is available to you. It has probably always been available to you. The question that the understanding cannot answer, that no analysis can answer, by the specific nature of what the question requires, is whether you're going to do anything with it in the domain where things are actually done, which is the domain of action rather than of analysis. Jung did not tell his brilliant patients that they deserved what they got in order to punish them. He told them because the alternative, the sustained treatment of their outcomes as the product of circumstances that had nothing to do with what they were willing to do about their own psychology, would guarantee the continuation of the outcomes. The capacity was never the question. It was never the constraint. The only question that has ever actually been relevant is the one that the intelligence has been working for years to make sure you never have to answer directly. What are you willing to do that you cannot think your way out of doing?